Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live Q&A with the Tegrity Health team. We have Dr. Keegan Ziemba, Dr. Matthew Taylor, and Stacy Seslowsky, our registered dietitian. They all work at Tegrity Health, which is a virtual integrative medicine clinic combining advanced diagnostics, precision medicine, and personalized nutrition and lifestyle care to help patients address root causes and build lasting wellness. We are going to answer some questions that have come through. So you're going to get to hear a little bit from all of our team here. For the first question, Dr. Ziemba, this one is for you. It says, why not just liposuction the fat instead of weight loss drugs? What are the advantages and disadvantages?
This is a really good question, Meredith, and not an uncommon one, to be honest with you, because it seems so easy that we could rely on something. So let's first talk about liposuction. It's a surgery to remove fat cells from targeted areas on the body. So what that means is, it's spot reduction in a sense. It's an invasive procedure. It is a surgery, and with that comes healing time, and there may be swelling, there may be bleeding afterwards, and then of course the time healing. So it's something that can be done on multiple areas on the body, so that's really a great benefit. And as I said, it's kind of instantaneous spot reduction in those areas. Most commonly we hear about people that kind of go in the abdominal area, or maybe around their thighs, or maybe on arms. I think those are probably the three most common areas. But how is this different from just, using weight loss medications? And the thing is, it's entirely different because this is spot reduction and this is physical removal of those fat cells. Then you are not changing anything underlying in your metabolic health. You may still have the exact same risk factors for potentially heart disease or stroke or any number of diabetes, kidney disease that come along with having poor metabolic health, even though you have spot reduced these fat cells. And that's because they only work on that subcutaneous fat layer, which is just underneath the skin. And it takes those cells out instead of taking some of the deeper visceral type fat out that we know is the more inflammatory type fat and increases our risk for all those different things that I mentioned. So when we go for whole body weight loss, now our body's making those metabolic changes that with it bring the reduced risk of all those other chronic diseases that we're worried about. So that's where it becomes really helpful to focus on that. Can you have both? Absolutely. And we do see that happening when people have a significant amount of weight to lose and they are using those weight loss medications, but then also maybe get some of the kind of physical contouring that can come with liposuction. The downsides of liposuction, in addition to the fact that it's a surgery and that you're not getting those metabolic changes, are also that you can have the cells nearby expand. They can actually do what we call hypertrophy. So if you do start to regain some weight, the cells nearby grow. So that area may regain that fat tissue just by the cells around it expanding. So it's not a lifelong prevention either with that. So that's something to keep in mind too. So is it something to never do? Absolutely not. It may be the right thing for you to talk about with your physician, but it is certainly not an answer to trying to make those metabolic changes with whole body weight loss.
Thank you so much for that information.
Certainly.
Dr. Taylor, our next question that came through is for you. They're asking, what are the potential negative impacts of an SSRI and how do you mitigate them?
Okay. Well, so I guess I would start by saying that that SSRIs can be very good at reducing anxiety, depression, obsessive thinking. That's generally how they're used. But the same brain chemistry that helps with some of the mood-based symptoms can interfere with other functions. Sexual function tends to be rising to the top of the list in a lot of cases, so I'll highlight that. But what I'll start with is kind of explaining why some of the side effects happen with these drugs, and then we can talk about some ideas on how to mitigate them. Most importantly, though, the side effects, and especially the sexual side effects of SSRIs, are real. They're common, and they are biologically understandable. They're not psychological weakness. They're not lack of attraction. So that's really important to note up front. Basically, the way these work is they increase serotonin signaling in the brain. And while serotonin can improve mood, it can work as sort of what you might think of as a natural brake pedal for some of the other neurotransmitters and other hormones in the brain that work. So we're talking about things like dopamine, which drive desire and motivation and reward and libido. Things like norepinephrine, which is the hormone governing arousal, excitement. And it can affect things like nitric oxide indirectly, which is involved in vasodilation and blood flow. So we essentially think of it as when serotonin becomes too dominant and there's more of an imbalance in higher serotonin signaling versus the signaling of these other hormones like dopamine and norepinephrine. That's where things like desire can decrease, genital sensation can be blunted, orgasm can be harder to achieve. All of those things shift as a result of some of the more dominant hormones in those types of physiology being low compared to serotonin. So, and this can affect men and women both. So both especially can experience like more emotional flattening, for instance, less intensity or less spontaneity of sexual thoughts. So the effects are honestly pretty common in both. When we want to understand why some SSRIs have these effects more than others, this isn't fully understood, though there are some generally well-known differences in some of the SSRI drugs versus others. For example, things like bupropion and mirtazapine and vortioxetine, these generally are thought of as having lesser side effects compared to some of the more common SSRIs like paroxetine and sertraline. So one strategy that can be employed is switching the SSRI to a different one, or even lowering the dose of the one that people are on. That's generally the first thought. The most evidence-based intervention on this front is usually adding bupropion, or Wellbutrin is the brand name. While that's the most evidence-based thing that can be used, it's something that some patients prefer not to do, usually for a lot of philosophical reasons, not wanting to add additional drug burden to their regimen, or not wanting to have too much of a dependence on other medicines to control side effects. So that's all understandable. Outside of that, things like lifestyle approaches are kind of where we start. Things like exercise, really important to increase dopamine and norepinephrine naturally. Also improves testosterone signaling, which may or may not be involved in some of the sexual desire side effects. Among lifestyle interventions, exercise is the most evidence-based thing as well. So sleep can be a factor. Certainly, we want to evaluate people for their sleep quality. Dopamine signaling and testosterone signaling can be blunted if sleep quality is not great. So sleep deprivation or reduced sleep quality with people on SSRIs can be a big factor. Lots of our patients ask about hormone deficiencies. I'll say this is probably the minority of the cases, whether it's low thyroid function, low testosterone function. These are things that we tend to try to rule out with people, but they're the less common things that we encounter. And then for those who have more of a, we'll say, naturalistic bias, or want to explore things that are non-pharmaceutical related, probably the best evidence is centered on saffron, of all things. And usually you're looking at dose ranges anywhere between 60 and 200 milligrams of something that has high, what we call crocin content. A lot of the high quality brands have like 7.5% or so of this crocin content, or 1% or more of safranal content. So you look for those on the labels and see if that's useful. Because I'm mentioning saffron, a good reference point for this is examine.com. This is a great website to kind of peruse the evidence on different nutraceuticals and supplements to see what their evidence base is. And so that's a good place to look for this kind of stuff. Many of our patients have used maca in the past, which can improve libido, improve a sense of sexual well-being. Effects are generally modest, and importantly, it doesn't exactly work as a counterpoint to what SSRIs do. There's also emerging evidence for things like peptide therapies. I'll fully admit at the onset that these fall more into the lesser evidence base, more experimental, though certainly low risk as far as peptides are very safe. Bremelanotide, or PT141, which does have FDA approval for sexual dysfunction, is one that is increasingly tried as an adjunct for people who are dealing with side effects of SSRIs. Certainly oxytocin can be administered intranasally. That's one other option that some patients have explored. And a third that I'll mention, but with a generous helping of caution, is kisspeptin. It's an emerging area of research only. There's some interesting ideas about kisspeptin being able to reactivate parts of the limbic system and sexual desire circuits in people who have had long exposure to SSRIs, particularly with something called PSSD, or post-SSRI sexual dysfunction. Why I want to caution people about that one is there's a fair amount of self-experimentation with kisspeptin that I think is not a great idea. Certainly, this would be something that you'd want to have somebody who's really well trained in this kind of medicine, especially since the cycling of kisspeptin, it has to be very specific in order to prevent further problems with one's own sexual dysfunction. So there are some nuances. I hope that gives you some ideas about how we might approach things. And if this is something where you know someone who's been on an SSRI long term and they're having a lot of these side effects, we can certainly help. So let us know how we can be helpful.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. This next question here is for Stacy. They're asking, what nutrition strategies actually help with inflammation, and how do you know if they're working beyond just eating clean?
Yeah, so I think it's first helpful to even understand what inflammation actually is, right? Inflammation is an immune system response, right? So anytime the immune system is responding to protect us or to heal something or to clear something out that seems threatening, the immune system responds like that, and that is the start of an inflammatory process. As I mentioned, the immune system doesn't only respond to protect us against pathogens and infections, but it also responds in circumstances like blood sugar dysregulation, lack of sleep, stress, and one that not everybody thinks of, but when cells are missing nutrients that they need to function appropriately, the immune system gets involved to try to help the cell get back up and running. So when we try to think about how to prevent an immune system response or inflammation in relation to our diet, there's a few things to think about. First is that if we eat a whole unprocessed food diet, then we are eating foods that haven't been changed since they were in nature for the most part. And those are foods and nutrients that our cells and our immune system and even our gut microbiome recognize. And those foods can then help be used for different healthy processes that take place in our body every day. But when we start to change our food, so process our food and add weird ingredients to our food to make them last longer on the shelf or taste different or change the texture of our food, those are nutrient or ingredients that are not recognizable and may seem even foreign or threatening to our immune system, and that would trigger an immune response, just like I mentioned already, and that is inflammation. So to start, choosing whole unprocessed foods is probably one of the most important things that we could do to try to minimize inflammatory processes that take place because of our diet. Another thing that we should think about doing is then also eating a diverse diet, right? Because I mentioned that when our cells are missing nutrients that they need to function, then the cell triggers an immune response. So the more of diversity that we add to our diet, the more we're hoping to get all the different nutrients that our body needs so that our cells are not nutrient deficient and they don't trigger an immune response. Another thing that we might want to consider is to even look up online something called the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. That is a list of foods that most importantly we choose organic, because some foods, when they are grown with many pesticides, they absorb more of the toxins and more of the pesticides than other foods. So it's a way to try to keep your expenses and your budget down, but also choose the most important foods that really should be organic versus other foods that, even when they're grown with pesticides, they don't seem to absorb as many of those toxins as they could. And the reason that is important is because toxins will trigger an immune response, just like infections, just like germs and viruses would trigger an immune response. So that would be another thing to consider. Two last ideas here are that, one, you also don't want a diet that is going to chronically dysregulate your blood sugar, because as I mentioned, blood sugar triggers an immune response and inflammation. So we certainly don't want to eat a very high sugar diet, and we want to think about combining our carbs with our proteins. So eating those things together can help minimize blood sugar spikes. And then finally, we also want to make sure that we are feeding the gut microbiome, because if there's an imbalance in the bacteria in our gut, that is also a trigger to our immune system. So by eating a high fiber diet, by eating resistant starch foods, which are things like rice, potatoes, those things feed our gut, the beneficial bacteria in our gut, so that we have a healthy gut microbiome. So from a dietary standpoint, just to review, whole unprocessed food diet, nutrient diversity, choosing foods from the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list to know how to choose between organic and non-organic, feeding your gut microbiome with high fiber and resistant starch foods, and also minimizing blood sugar, dysregulation.
Wow, Stacy, thank you so much for that thorough answer. That was a lot of information I never even knew before, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ziemba, this next question is going to bounce back to you. They are asking, what is the best tracking website or apps for insight on your wearable devices?
Oh, okay. So there's so much out there nowadays. It's really cool. I did a dive onto this, and there's no perfect website. It's kind of taking it as what you are looking to track. So I think when you're trying to combine multiple devices, something like Inside Tracker can be helpful, but there's a whole bunch of them out there now. Things like Welltory and Reflect and Wearable are ways to help you kind of bring in data from multiple sites. The thing is, what are you doing with that data? And that's the most important part. And I am going to take this moment to get on my soapbox and say, What's most important is how you feel, and not so much what the data is telling you how you should feel. So when I wake up and my aura rings like, you did not have a good night of sleep, and I'm like, I feel great, then I should probably listen to me in that regard, or vice versa. You know, my Garmin says, nope, you're ready to go, you know, you're fully recovered. And I'm like, no, my legs still feel like lead. I'm not going out for that VO2 max or whatever it recommends session today. That's what's most important about these wearables. They are increasing in their capacity and their accuracy, but they are still far from the most accurate things. You know, the sleep is a big one, right? Like you've got Aura, you've got Garmin, you've got Whoop out there. You know, those are your big device, really, really popular devices. Sleep accuracy varies between all of them. Apple Health in there too. Right now, it seems like Whoop and Aura do probably the best at breaking down the sleep stages. But even then, you know, it can be like you were wide awake, you know, from 2 to 4 a.m. and you weren't actually wide awake, but you were moving a lot. That messes up their algorithms. So that's something to really keep in mind with these wearables. I think Inside Tracker is a great one to try and pull in data from multiple places. You can even do the same thing on Apple Health. You can pull in your data from multiple, you know, your Oura Ring, your Garmin, into one setting. I know people that are just creating their own personal apps out there. So that's kind of cool too, if you have that tech capability, but I do not. I think the biggest things to look for is what they're going to do with your data. So really check the privacy settings, make sure that there's nothing that can be shared, because it's your data and it shouldn't be out there for the world to take up and use for whatever reason. So really be careful with that. Be really cautious about what you do with your health data out there. I think there's no right answer, just because it really depends. Are you someone who is more performance-based and you're using these devices to improve that performance and get, you know, increase your VO2 max, for example? Or are you somebody who's more focused on habit tracking and just trying to get into the groove of making sure you hydrate with enough water during the day, making sure you do check your boxes of getting enough steps each day? So I think that's going to vary in terms of what's going to be recommended. Kudos to those that are tracking, you know, these kind of things, because I do think they can help you keep accountable to making those health changes.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Ziemba. I appreciate that. All right, Dr. Taylor, this next question is for you. They're asking, with AI and lots of podcasters and other easily available information, who do you listen to for health information as a trusted resource?
Okay. So forgive a little bit of amusement up front there. Yes, there's honestly more health information available now today than ever. Some of it's excellent, some of it's really not. And I think maybe a good way of answering this is to encourage patients to seek information from reputable sources and stay curious. And I can give you 3 questions that would make sense to ask in a moment that can help a person evaluate a source for whether it's credible. Before I do that, I think one important thing to note up front, when it comes to AI, social media, podcasts, or websites where people are getting health information, the most important question to ask is whether it actually applies to your individual health needs and circumstances. Because a lot of these avenues and mediums can sound good, they can be attractive, they can essentially get us really curious about potential health effects of different things, but the whether it applies to you personally, I think matters most. So we will often ask patients to bring us questions or articles or social media or podcast posts so that we can help them interpret the evidence behind the claims that are being made. We can help people separate fact from misinformation. determine what's relevant and safe for you. And I really do think the best health decisions come from combining credible information with that personalized medical guidance. So with that said, I'll give you 3 questions that everybody should ask when they're evaluating one of these sources. And that's who's saying it, what evidence supports it, and why are they saying it? Okay, so number 1, who's providing the information? What are their qualifications? Expertise really matters. So you should look for people who have relevant training and credentials and experience in the topic being discussed. 2, what evidence supports the claims they're making? So credible sources often will directly or indirectly reference established research or clinical guidelines or scientific studies rather than relying on solely personal anecdotes or testimonials. So that's an important distinction to make. A teacher that all of us on the Tegrity team follow once said that the plural of anecdote is not evidence. And I think it's a good soundbite to guide that second question. 2, on the flip side of that, or on the spectrum of evidence, just because something does not have, say, a randomized controlled trial or sort of a robust meta-analysis for backing up certain claims, that doesn't mean that there's no evidence or no quality evidence to support something that's being said. So sometimes we have to rely on mechanism of action type of data. Sometimes we have to rely on other types of studies, cohort studies, or comparative type of things. So ultimately, this issue of evidence for the claims made, definitely something that we ask our patients bring to us their questions, and we evaluate it together. That last question is the why question, like why is this message being put out there, or what's the motivation behind the message? So consider that the person giving you information is either trying to educate or sell a product or promote a service or drive engagement. Importantly, financial and promotional interests don't automatically invalidate information, but they should be transparent. So in the spirit of transparency, we on the Tegrity team, we are actively trying to educate you and promote engagement and try to encourage trust in us and credibility and reliance on us to help sort through, all of the myriad information that's out there. So yeah, like we get paid to give you advice, and that's what we want to do. So just want to be really clear about that. The framework, though, really easy. Those 3 questions again: who's saying it, what evidence supports it, why are they saying it? And you should ask those 3 questions for every one of these sources or influences or researchers that you're evaluating.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. That's a good thing to remember, those 3 questions when you're looking at a source. It looks like we have time for one more question. So this one is going to be for Stacy. They are asking, is intermittent fasting helpful, harmful, or mostly dependent on the person?
Yes. So this is a contested question, I guess. But, intermittent fasting means different things to different people, right? I feel that if we are fasting for anywhere from 12 to 14 hours overnight, I think that is absolutely appropriate and healthy. If we start to increase the hours of fasting and decrease the window when we're eating, then we have to take into account a few things. First is that probably the biggest benefit that is seen in research from intermittent fasting is really just from the idea that we are restricting calories. It really doesn't have as much to do with the shorter, fewer hours of eating. More so, it has to do with just cutting calories. And calorie restriction can certainly have benefits depending on the individual person and their health condition, right? If someone is obese or has metabolic syndrome, there certainly can be benefits to restricting calories. Within that, I think it's very important that you do make sure to be eating enough calories for your activity level. So you certainly don't want to undereat and over-exercise, because that will just work against your ultimate goal. It will somewhat slow your metabolism, slow your weight loss if that's what you're looking for, and also slow your level of performance in your workouts. So you're still going to try to eat enough calories to meet your activity level, and also to consider any health conditions such as recovery from an injury or from surgery, things like that. Then you really do need to eat enough to be able to heal and recover and things like that. But then when you do get more into just the timing of things, and if you are going to be cutting back on the window of the hours that you're going to be eating versus the hours that you're fasting, I would say that I would prefer for people to cut down on the hours where they finish eating earlier in the evening, but still eat breakfast at a very healthy time in the morning, like soon after waking, because the more you postpone eating in the morning, the more risk you are having to dysregulate your blood sugar, to dysregulate your circadian rhythm, to impact even your hormone balance, your immune system. All of these things get started in the morning when we wake up, have a healthy cortisol spike, and when we eat at the same time. So oftentimes if you start to skip breakfast, trying to wait until about noon to eat, then not only are you disrupting these systems in the body, but then you end up feeling hungry throughout the rest of the day, snacking and craving sweets and things like that. And that also will work against you. So and then finally, the last piece of this is like the thought that intermittent fasting is going to promote this process called autophagy, which is a process where cells get rid of their broken parts and become new healthy cells. And that is something that is being looked at in research for longevity and things like that. But there really is no good definitive evidence to show that, number one, intermittent fasting could possibly promote autophagy. You would probably have to fast for several days for autophagy to actually start. And even then, we don't know if that's across the board consistent for every person. And, it's very hard to actually test for autophagy in human clinical trials. So just going back to the intermittent fasting piece, I think it's important that you're getting enough calories for your activity level and your health, that you are eating breakfast and possibly just shortening and, finishing dinner, but let's say at an earlier hour. But I wouldn't take this to an extreme of constant, waiting until noon or later every day to eat.
Very helpful information. Thank you so much, Stacy. So that is all the time that we have for our team here today. And I just want to thank Stacy and Dr. Taylor and Dr. Ziemba for taking time out of their days to speak with us. For anyone watching, if you missed any portion of this video, it can be found on YouTube, and we'll also be posting it on our socials if you want to watch the entirety. And then if you have any questions for our team, please feel free to leave them in the comments or on our social media accounts. We do have a Google form. You can leave an anonymous question there, and we can hopefully answer it at our next Q&A. And most importantly, if you are interested in working with Stacy, Dr. Taylor, Dr. Ziemba, if you go to tegrityhealth.com, you can book a discovery call and find out how they might be able to help you. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.